All right, I'm going to try to make a short video about Ben Crump. I'm starting out on a little series of videos that I find about him, so I just wanted to go with this one real quick. Right now, he's at a town hall meeting, and it's somewhere around late March, and he's trying to get the council to agree with him. Right now he's got a group of people that are saying no justice, no peace. One guy said, he's like, we've got some important things to talk about. One of the guys yelled out, we don't need no talking. I guess they're ready for something besides talk. But he's going to say, we're going to divorce ourselves from emotion, because we all know that emotion does not solve logical issues. We're trying to figure out something, and emotion just clouds that issue. I'm glad he admits that, because what's going on in the courtroom is obviously an emotional outbreak.
They are very, very emotional, because when you hear those 911 tapes, we know where the end is, and they know what that tape meant, that they lost their child at the end of that 911 tape. But as lawyers and as the legal team here, we're going to attempt to divorce ourselves from emotion for a few minutes, to ask some questions that we implore you to ponder and use your leadership to make the decisions. We ask that you let your heart be your guide.
So we're going to divorce ourselves from emotion, but we want our heart to be our guide. I think it's the other way around, right? Usually when you divorce yourself from emotion, you let your brain be your guide. Never mind.
There are questions that we have asked that have not been answered, Mr. Mayor.
Questions that have been asked and have not been answered.
Fellow commissioners. We asked questions on February 26th at 7:17 p.m. Who was the officer who made a decision, for whatever reason, to not do a background check?
There he goes. He's going to ask a couple questions here. This one's he's going to ask, who was the officer that made the decision not to do a background check on George Zimmerman when they did a background check on Trayvon? And my answer to him would be, if I were there, chances are good that they didn't know who Trayvon was. He didn't show up in their computer as far as being arrested or having any kind of history there in Sanford, because he's from Miami. That would be a good reason. I believe they knew George at least somewhat, and probably better than we knew at the time, because he had done a drive around with them. He had some contact with them in the year before, and he also had been a part of the neighborhood watch, which is connected with the sheriff's office, so they knew him. I mean, at least somewhat. When they started digging around and saying, who is this Zimmerman guy, and they punched it in the computer, they found that he was an upstanding neighborhood guy. He had been in the community, and they probably walked around and said, hey, you know George? Oh, we know George. And he got a lot of good feedback. So that's probably why the number one question was answered, and this is how I answer it. They didn't know who Trayvon was. They needed to find out. Background check. They knew who George was. They didn't need to do a background check. And that wasn't necessary.
George Zimmerman, who had just shot and killed Trayvon Benjamin Martin. But yet, saw fit to do a background check on this dead child on the ground. Number two, who was the officer who made the determination not to do a drug and alcohol analysis?
All right, same question. He's just taking forever for drama. Why did they do a drug and alcohol analysis on Trayvon and not on George? Well, let me answer that real quick for you, Mr. Crump. George is standing there, obviously 100% alert, at least acceptably to a police officer, not somebody who's drunk or even eyes dilated. Police officers can just look at a person, look in their eyes. You know, they can tell if you're on a drug that would impair you in a way that would make it unsafe to operate a car or a motorcycle or even a gun. So, you know, there are laws that say you're not allowed to have a gun in your possession when you're drunk. So, you know, if the police officer looked at him and said, he's drunk, well, there's a crime right there. It wouldn't have been murder, because you're allowed to defend yourself even when you're drunk, even with a gun. That's legal. But that wasn't the case. The police weren't concerned. I mean, did you see the video where he's walking into the police department with his hands behind his back and the police is looking at the back of his head? Yeah, I don't think he looked like he needed to be tested for drugs or alcohol at that time. And he was being perfectly honest and asked for a lawyer.
Zimmerman, who had just shot an unarmed teenager with a bag of Skittles, but yet found it appropriate to order a drug and alcohol analysis of civilian Tracy's son. Who was the officer who made the determination that we were going to just question Mr. Zimmerman and take his statements as a gospel?
I don't think any officer made a decision to take George's word as gospel. In fact, they were very careful. They put him in handcuffs. They put him in a car. They took him to jail. They questioned him intensively. They looked at all the evidence. They questioned the witnesses. All the evidence, the witnesses, and George's story came together to draw a beautiful picture that all matched. And when that happens, it's a wonderful thing. It makes life so much easier. And in normal cases, George would have walked home free like he did, and everything would have been normal and everything would have been fine. It wasn't until later on that the somewhere along the line, people that are involved in race issues, whenever I look on TV, the only reason they're on TV is for race issues. You see them on here, and it's all about a white guy killing a black guy. That's just, that's what I saw.
And let him go home that night with the clothes and the evidence that he had on his body.
The stand your ground law is very clear that if you defend yourself with whatever tool you have handy, let's say you used your pinky and stabbed a guy in the eye, went through his eye and into his brain and killed him, and now they're saying maybe it's murder, but all the evidence is pointing in the direction of self-defense. For example, your face is busted up and the guy's hand is busted, and you have cracks on the back of your head, things like that point to the thought that you're innocent, then our law says that you don't go to jail at all. Not that night, not ever. You don't even spend a night in jail. That's why we made the law. We were sick and tired of good people doing nothing more than defending their lives, ending up spending time in jail. And not just a few nights, not just a couple months, but sometimes many months. It gets to be very long, and you can see what's happening here. It's not fair. If there was evidence that George did something wrong, it would have come out by now. But they don't have the evidence, and and here's what they're using. They're saying the evidence is that George was pursuing Trayvon, and that means chasing him with intent to catch. There is no evidence of that anywhere. And George passed a lie detector test saying that that wasn't the truth. Then they say that George was stalking Trayvon. See, that is a crime. Stalking is a crime, and it's listed in the Florida laws. The problem is, for someone to stalk another person, it has to be willful, it has to be malicious, and it has to be repeated, following or harassing. So we know it would be impossible to consider it repeated, whatever it was. It certainly wasn't malicious, because we know that Trayvon wasn't he wasn't distressed. I mean, he certainly wasn't. He came back. He was on top of George. He wasn't distressed. He wasn't being terrorized in any way. This was not a malicious act. George was monitoring him from a distance.
Who was the police officer who presented the preliminary police report? And as I understand, we have a lot of law enforcement here, a lot of law enforcement organizations here, and all of them to one have called in and wrote in and emailed, as this matter has become a world.
He's just going on and on now. This is not any valid point.
City manager, that if a person killed another individual in cold blood who was unarmed, and they put forth the claim of self-defense, then it was proven, and the responsibility of the officer to document in that initial report every claim that would either support his self-defense or defeat his self-defense.
Well, he did. All the officers did. There were several.
And the world are asking questions, a report that then tries to bolster George Zimmerman's.
Now he's saying that the officers tried to bolster George's claims by their reports. Of course they bolstered his claims, because the evidence bolstered his claims. They just say what they see. And unless he wants to come up with evidence that suggests that they were being racist or lying or trying to trick the legal system in favor of George, he needs to change his attitude. If I were him, I would be going back to that police department and kissing their butts. I mean, his claims, his attitude towards them as if they did something wrong, when now we know they did everything right. It's unacceptable, especially a lawyer who's in this case and has the potential to incite riots. He has the potential, and he's right on the verge here where he's talking. I mean, in the beginning it sounds like it's all nicety, but he's getting on the edge.
You all have to hold them accountable. Nobody else can do it here in this city. You all have to ask these questions, take the names, and
They did their job. We already know that now.
Several times that that's
All right. So anyhow, this is one of the commissioners saying that we've already gone down this path, and and he said, tells him, Mr. Crump, we already, I talked to you personally, and we did discuss it, and as you know, we're doing all these things, everything that you suggested. We're going right down that path.
I can't change what transpired. I swear to you.
So he's saying, I can't change the department. He's talking about, the police department. The way that they do things is the way they do things. That's what they do. I mean, the city doesn't micromanage the police. If anybody has evidence that the police department did something wrong in this investigation, please bring it forward, because it hasn't been brought forward yet. If anyone has evidence that the department of or the DA's office did something wrong, please bring it forward, because so far both of those agencies have cleared George, and they have listed this as a stand your ground case, done, finished, over, and they're the ones that matter. Once it went past the DA's office, it was extra legal. It was beyond what our legal system does. It's not fair. And George was cleared by the DA. That's the end of the case. These guys brought all this stuff together and started this all in a political witch hunt. And that's fine and dandy, but it's not right. The governor should have never appointed a special prosecutor. He should have let the DA handle the case. When they were done, they were done. Apparently he thought there was going to be riots, and he wanted to stop riots. He wanted to save people from getting hurt. But you know what? The law's the law. If a man is not guilty, you don't throw him in jail to appease the crowds. We're not going to crucify somebody just to make a bunch of people happy. And that's the way they used to do it in the old days. If they couldn't find the criminal, they would just grab somebody that everybody was happy with and blame him and kill him. We don't do that anymore. No. You got to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And all he has to do is he doesn't even have to show anything, really. All the evidence is leaning with the preponderance on his side, and that clears him. That's why the special prosecutor broke the law by arresting him. So they broke the law. What we need to do now is change the law, the stand your ground law, and we need to add teeth to it, so that when this ever happens again and somebody gets arrested, then the prosecutor needs to be arrested or have some sort of penalty, lose their job, $5,000 fine. I don't know, something really good. It can't just be anything, because this is huge. Imagine what George has gone through and what he lost because of her misunderstanding, or her will to ignore the law, ignore the facts. It's sad. I'm going on, and I'm going to let you guys go.